Here we go. Today is Saturday, October 22nd, 2016, and this is episode 174 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me is, holy cow, it's Mr. Andrew Callett.
You can't get rid of me that easy, can you?
Nope, you're back.
I'm like a bad penny. I just keep coming back.
Sweet. Well, it's good to have you back.
Thanks. But I hear Martin did a great job filling in for me last show.
He did.
So thank you to him. He's a good guy, and we really appreciate that.
Yes and yes.
And for those who don't know, I disappeared for a little while. I got married and had a honeymoon, and those are sort of time-consuming activities.
Yeah, new wives tend to frown upon podcasting during the honeymoon. Or so I have been told.
Amongst other things, she's actually standing right over my shoulder right now with a rolling pin. It's kind of awkward, but I guess this is what married life is now.
Don't mess up.
And how are you, sir? How's things on your end?
Insanely busy. My rear end is the shape of an airplane seat right now. So
yeah, you're never home, but you will be in New York next weekend for the O'Reilly Security Conference, as will I.
That's right. And by the way, just to remind people, they actually have I think time's running kind of low, but they have a new program, which I mentioned last week, which is if you buy a ticket, you can get a buddy pass, right? So you can get a free buy one, get one free ticket, which is pretty cool.
If I had friends, I would do that.
Yeah, I invited a coworker, and so that's pretty awesome.
Nice. The one last thing I want to say on that is you and I, Jerry and I, are hosting the Ignite panel Monday the 31st, actually, Halloween night.
That's right.
Which is a fun kind of thing. We've already got a bunch of people lined up. And if you've never been to Ignite thing, it's kind of cool. The concept is you have 5 minutes, 20 slides, auto advance. And you can talk about almost anything you want, although pretty much all of our topics are security focused. But the concept is if you had 5 minutes to present on whatever you want, but you have to deal with the fact that slides advance every 15 seconds, it can get kind of crazy. So it's a fun sort of event. And,
Yep.
I think hopefully folks will come out and have fun with us. So we're emceeing, as it were, that event, and then we'll be kicking around the conference for the hopefully the rest of the conference. I'm there Sunday through Wednesday. I'm not sure what your schedule is.
We'll be there too.
Excellent.
It's going to be some great talks. It looks like so yeah. I hope to see you there. If you're going to be there, look us up. And just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employer.
Past, present, or future.
Right. So our first story, actually, I had to find sound effects for this story. And so here we go. Yes, that's right. We have the dirty cow.
I'm hiding under my desk. What do I do? Duck and cover.
So yes.
Yeah, are the cybers attacking? What do I do?
The cybers are attacking.
Oh man. There's
a new named Linux vulnerability, which is super serious. Mm-hmm. It's a privilege escalation. I mean, it has its own logo. And by the way, not only does it have its own logo and its own website, it has its own merchandise store. Nice. Where you can buy T-shirts and mugs, although they're all thousands of dollars. So,
in bitcoins.
Anyway, there's nothing spectacular. What is interesting about it, by the way, is that it's an 11-year-old bug. It was attempted to be patched about 11 years ago by Linus himself, and he apparently had to reverse the patch because it didn't. The patch broke Linux on S390s, the IBM mainframe.
And did he scream at himself incoherently on the email lists that he usually does when somebody breaks something with a patch?
No, he did point out he actually it was interesting because he copied his old the original email from 2005 where he discussed the fix. So it's been known about. The problem is, as far as I can tell, it's only been really recently that this has become a likely attack mechanism because it requires a race condition, and so it requires relatively fast hardware to get the race condition into a spot where you can actually overwrite files. And so the whole deal is that you can use this exploit to overwrite files that are owned by root, right? So you can take something that's owned by root and put your own code in there, so the next time it gets run, it does whatever you want it to do. So it's it's certainly not a good thing. It's not earth ending.
No, it's not. It's not remotely exploitable, which in theory, at this point in the first round, where I see these being useful is usually in a string attack, where a chain attack, where somebody finds, hey, one particular low level attack gets you at least some sort of access, but it's a user level access, or now you can go to root, or an insider could leverage this sort of thing, or someone moving laterally in the organization can use this sort of thing. So it's weird because we have this concept of, well, can it be remotely exploitable? With today's attack chains and your favorite term, the kill chain, I don't know that is a great criteria to base your decision on, because we now usually start some sort of attack with a stolen or obtained credential with some sort of valid account to begin with.
Yeah, I think it's certainly less severe than something that's remotely exploitable, but I definitely think that it's more urgent than a lot of people give local prevest bugs credit for. So
it's incredibly pervasive, right? I mean, this is in many kernels.
Pretty much every kernel that's in common use today.
And the challenge is, at least as I've seen, is getting folks to patch a kernel. Usually get some sysadmins to look at you a little sideways if they're not, they don't know the criticality, or this is a pretty big deal for them to take down a Linux box and reboot for a lot of very high uptime environments.
Yeah, and I got to thinking that this could be a real big problem for all of the routers and whatnot that are based off of Linux. But then I got to remembering, you log in as root anyway, right? So there's really no requirement.
All those are already controlled by Chinese botnets anyway, so I'm sure they'll be patching it as part of their due diligence in running the botnets. It'll be fine.
That's true. I've often wondered, do those, when you go to hire, a outsourced, crime as a service type thing, like, do you have a vendor management program where you do you send them like a big spreadsheet and they have to fill out the
I think so. With the the right to do on-site audits.
Right. They have to get like a SSA 16 or
probably. There's probably like a Better Business Bureau accreditation for crimeware.
Interesting.
If not, we should start that.
Seems like ripe for a possibility.
A+++ botnet would flood again.
Yelp for cybercrime.
And Angie's List competitor for
So anyway, Patrick Crap. I just looked, and there's apparently still not a lot of the current. Like, I think Red Hat and CentOS don't have patches yet. So
yeah,
the fun is yet ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on to our next story, and this one comes from Softpedia.com, and the title is "Hackers Steal Research and User Data from Japanese Nuclear Research Lab." So the deal here is that there's a university in Japan called University of Toyama's Hydrogen Isotope Research Center.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, seriously. Apparently,
professionals would practice that sort of thing before the show.
I did, and it still went badly. Still went horribly. So anyway, this, as you might gather from the name of this research center, they work on hydrogen isotopes, particularly tritium, which is one of the isotopes commonly used in fusion power generation, but also in nuclear bombs. And they had I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or 60,000 documents stolen, 59,000 documents stolen. And the thing that I wanted to mention here is that most likely it's not, it's not some, card forum group going after information on IAEA documents, which that was what was the term they were looking for when they stole documents. I'm guessing it wasn't some commodity type thing. So it's probably dare I say it, a nation state. I don't really know, but I know, right? But here's the deal, right? They got it through phishing attacks,
and a very well thought out phishing attack. So the bad guys posed as students and sent emails with basically malicious Word documents with questions to the researchers.
Right. And those documents had embedded malware. Yep.
So I'm looking at that as, this is why we keep saying user awareness training is not sufficient. You could train your users all day long, and they're probably going to fall for something like that because it's so normal and expected behavior, and it feeds into everything that is expected about that position to be done. And so you've got to back up user awareness training with technical controls. You're never going to stop that sort of social engineering.
Right.
What's also interesting about this attack is they got a ton of personal information about the other researchers, which makes the next round of spear phishing even that much more targeted and successful.
Right, because now they have kind of a social network, a mapping of a social network between these researchers.
Right.
So they know who knows who.
The other thing that I thought was interesting, and you were kind of hinting at this, and I'm just going to go ahead and steal your thunder. One of the bits of information they got was about Fukushima, and which is the planet that had the big meltdown after the big earthquake and tsunami knocked off the generators and the backup generators, and bad stuff happened. I wonder if there's a possibility that this might be some sort of politically motivated WikiLeaks type attack to dig up dirt about Fukushima, because there's plenty of conspiracy theory and weirdness going on around that whole situation. So I wonder if that might have motivated it.
Certainly possible. I mean, I think WikiLeaks is becoming, kind of a political tool these days.
Yeah, and I'm not saying WikiLeaks is behind it, but I'm saying something like that concept.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
agreed. But I think the more interesting thing to me is that here's a relatively high profile group with a lot to lose, pretty obviously, assuming pretty sensitive information, and they're getting compromised with just plain old phishing.
Yeah. Yep. And because it works.
Right.
And so 59,000 files that they know of. They don't know what the files were. They a lot of it was encrypted and sent out. It seems to me like they probably had some sort of network monitoring that caught the exfiltration after the fact when they went back and figured it out, but not anything that told them what was being stolen. But I gotta wonder, man, what kind of freaky Japanese tentacle porn files do you think they captured?
I was waiting for that. Oh boy. So anyway, I guess
you laugh, but
I did.
Come on, man.
The point. I think the point is that phishing is still. I think phishing is a tool of choice, kind of up and down the maturity curve for attackers.
Yeah, I agree.
It's super easy to perpetrate. It's super effective. And we're just, as an industry, we're not really doing a great job of defending against it. So moving on to our next story, which comes from databreaches.net, and the title is Rainbow Children's Clinic Notifies 33,368 Patients of a Ransomware Attack. Now, there's nothing particularly incredible about this. There apparently was a ransomware attack against this clinic, and I guess they mentioned that there's some data that's unrecoverable. What was most interesting to me is that the clinic notified the Health and Human Services Department of Health and Human Services here in the U.S., which is a requirement for breaches of personal health records. And then also they are notifying each of the individual people and offering identity theft resolution services for a ransomware attack.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Now, the only thing that I can say, and it's a little unclear, it's just very briefly mentioned at the very beginning of the article on August 3rd, 2016, and this is a quote: Rainbow Children's Clinic was the victim of a hacker who accessed its computer system and then launched a ransomware attack that began encrypting data stored on the clinic's servers. So the only thing I could think of is possibly there's an assumption that because they don't know for certain that the hacker didn't copy the data off, that that they feel they have to disclose. But otherwise, it's the concept of having to disclose to regulators that you got hit with ransomware is a little odd.
Yeah, I concur. It's interesting too because they keep in mind this is a quote coming from their website, so there's a lot of spin on this. But the way they mention it could be just something lost in translation. But continuing from the quote you said, Rainbow Children's Clinic retained an independent computer forensic expert to assist, and through the investigation, the clinic discovered that some patient records have been irretrievably deleted. I wonder if they mean by that because they were encrypted, they couldn't retrieve them. But to say they were irretrievably deleted is kind of odd.
Yeah, I took that to mean they were encrypted and they didn't want to pay the ransom.
Now the other fun part is, this is where we get some spin. Rainbow Children's Clinic takes the security of our patients' information very seriously.
Now they do.
Of course you do. Yeah, now they do. And have taken steps to prevent a similar event from occurring in the future, including strengthening security measures, ensuring that its networks and systems are now secure.
And by that, they mean not allowing Facebook from the computer that controls the health records. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to know why they only help rainbow children. That seems very limiting and somewhat racist.
Ooh, I don't know. I'm not
just saying.
I'm not going to go there. I'm not going there. So
see what getting married does to me? Just off the hook.
Nice. So So now our I guess our last story for this evening. Actually, I've got to pull it out again. Here, there we go. Okay, it's a little shorter this time. This comes from Brian Krebs' blog. Hopefully, everybody, well, maybe not everybody knows, but we had a existential event happen on the internet here in the U.S. yesterday. And basically, there was an attack, a major DDoS attack. I really don't know how large the attack was, but on a company called Dyn or Dyn or I don't know.
I've always pronounced it Dyn as in Dyn DNS, but I'm not sure that's accurate.
See, they could call it Cyberdyne, and you know what that would be, right?
Oh man.
Yep. Maybe after this, they're going to rename themselves Cyberdyne, and they're going to come up with maybe some artificial intelligence to help them, avoid such things in the future. And they could, I don't know, maybe call it like Sky something, right?
Are you done?
No.
Okay.
Anyway, so Dyn is a major DNS provider, outsourced DNS provider, used by a lot of companies such as Twitter, Amazon, Tumblr, Reddit, Spotify, and Netflix. And in the ensuing DDoS, a lot of these sites actually became unavailable because most of them use CDN, and CDN requires typically a really low time to live on your DNS records. And so once the Dyn DNS service became unavailable, those records quickly expired. And even though the back-end web servers of all these organizations were apparently up and running and not having any problems, nobody could get to them because DNS was hosed.
Yeah, and this is interesting. So for a long time, advice for dealing with DDoS against your hosts was to have a short TTL on your records, on your DNS records, so you could easily swing them to another IP address. Here, that kind of backfired on us.
Yep.
And ultimately, because we said, okay, we want the flexibility to change an IP address and have that age out very quickly. Because for those who may not be familiar with DNS, what happens is when you get a record of a resolution, it basically comes with you can cache this information for X amount of time before you have to go look it up again. And that's configurable. You can, I don't even know what the bounds are on it, but it could be 1 minute to 1 day. It could be a week. It could be a month. I think it goes out pretty far as a cached time frame. So, but what happens is once that cache expires, if you can't do a lookup again, in general, most DNS servers don't honor that cache once it's expired. They don't say, well, if I can't get it, I'm going to go back and keep this. They just lose their minds. But if you had a longer time, it would keep it. So that was great if your DNS server was down. The downside to all that is if my website is being attacked and it's, on an IP address and I need to swing it to another IP address, if I have a long cache time on my DNS record, I have to wait for all that time to expire on all of my clients or people out in the world to then pick it up again and figure out the new IP address. So we kind of shot ourselves in the foot on one way that we defend against a DDoS with a different way we defend against a DDoS based on CDN.
Yeah, the other thing that strikes me too is that we, and this is happening at multiple levels, right? We are outsourcing more and more of this of our IT and internet infrastructure to centralized companies, and so in this particular case, one particular organization, an attack on that organization yielded a number of really significant companies being brought down.
Yep.
And so it kind of goes against the fundamental design principles of the internet itself to consolidate all this stuff into, so for instance, if Twitter and Amazon and Tumblr, they were all running their own DNS servers, this wouldn't have been a possible type of attack. But at the same time, there's probably some significant benefits they get from doing that outsourcing.
Well, the whole point of giving it to something like Dyn was to not have this sort of problem in theory happen. And it's interesting because a lot of people, Twitter's been very, very active around this, as you might imagine. And a lot of smart people are talking about, well, why were so many organizations on one DNS provider? Isn't that a bad idea? Well, as you and I have both seen, when you start getting to a certain level in an organization, a certain size in the organization, one of the wonderful, wonderful techniques of executives to do to sort of figure out if they're doing the right thing is to say, hey, what is our competitor doing? Let's go do that too.
Yeah, benchmarking.
On things that are not core to the organization or not competitive differentiators. And so, it's this whole wisdom of crowd things turned on its head because we start then measuring our organizations against our competitors. I see this all the time in information security too. They ask consultants, hey, or they ask vendors of products, can you compare us against our vertical of people our size? How do we rank up? Because they want to make sure that, the concept in part is that they sort of can tap into what their competitors' thinking is and maybe shortcut some of their own design decisions, and also make sure they're not over underspending with limited resources on a certain area. But here is the flip side. You get one really strong organization that becomes the de facto standard for this sort of thing for large organizations, and you really concentrate a lot of risk as a result. Now, that being said, I'm sure Dyn is not sitting there just taking this. They will get stronger as a result of this attack and make it less likely for it to happen in the future. But this is an arms race, and it will probably keep going back and forth. Now, I know there's a lot more to this story. I just kind of wanted to ramble along on that for a minute, but I'll give it back to you.
Sure. So, what's interesting is the source of the attack appears to be the same botnet or the same botnet tooling that was used to attack Krebs site about a month ago with the at the time record 620 gigabit DDoS attack. And what's happened since then is the tooling that was used to attack Krebs' site at the time, a package called Mirai, I guess is how you say it, was the source code for that was made public. And so now basically anybody can conceivably use it. Its function is to kind of scan the internet looking for a certain set of vulnerable devices, typically webcams. So not the kind of webcam that's on top of your PC, but think the embedded internet IP cameras, and then also DVRs. And again, not the TiVo kind of DVR, but the kind of DVR that monitors your security cameras. And apparently, there are a lot of these devices from a couple of particular vendors that have, listening on Telnet, and B, hard-coded or default credentials that are often not changed by the user, or the user can't change them, and then C, they're exposed to the internet. And so this botnet basically is scanning the internet, and I see it on my server, by the way. I mean, I look at my logs, and I actually had to turn off some logging because I was getting so much scan traffic on port 23. It was really overwhelming. It's trying to propagate itself, and it gets a foothold on one of these devices, and now it becomes a bot in the army. And so I guess it was maybe a month or two ago, some assessments were done on I don't know if it was in this particular story or not, but I've read some other things that said that there were approximately 515,000 of these devices accessible from the internet.
So a couple.
So, yeah, just a couple.
Which I find fascinating, because at least in the U.S., the vast majority of folks have some sort of NAT device at the edge.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely fascinating that these have that many raw IPv4 addresses on them.
Well, the only thing I can think of, and this is something I have been pondering too, the only thing I can think of is that it's done intentionally, right? Because the people who set this up in whatever context they're setting it up want to be able to access it remotely.
So they're setting up some sort of static NAT or forwarding it from their edge device.
I'm assuming. I mean, I don't know I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, otherwise, there's a whole lot of people that have figured out how to, cable around their firewalls.
I suppose. I don't know. I mean, it's on. But anyway, continue.
So anyhow, this particular botnet was apparently the at least one of the sources, if not the only source of the attack that took down Dyn the other day. So now as you mentioned, there's lots and lots of hand wringing going on, and in particular because of the election coming up, there's I think Bruce Schneier actually made a comment that maybe this was a test, right? And I'm not there, and the reason I'm not there is that once you run a test like that, I mean, certainly this was effective, but now it's on people's radar,
right?
And so it's really not. Now maybe it happens under completely different circumstances. I don't know. But, I would imagine that some percentage of the infected devices have since been cleaned. I mean, I'm sure there's still
maybe
way too many.
Fundamentally, they have a default password you can't change. This is when you get into the type of devices we're talking about, there's a fundamental flaw here, which is that they were put out with a default password that cannot be changed in the field.
No, I agree, but I'm assuming that there are some percentage, and it may be a low percentage. Maybe I'm being overly naive here, where the ISPs were contacted and, did the whole "you're violating the terms of service"
and took them offline.
Yeah,
possibly.
Yeah,
I guess we'd have to see where the majority of these live, like what jurisdiction. And
there was a map that came out earlier today doing an analysis of that, and it's pretty much evenly spread across the whole world.
Interesting. Well, and now there's a lot of people talking about, well, these sorts of devices that can be used to attack other devices should just be immediately disconnected from the internet, and we should have the ability to do that. That gets into a really slippery slope in my mind.
Yeah,
this is a fairly egregious. Yeah, I mean, this is an incredibly egregious example of a device that clearly the security considerations for this device and its design and development were minimal to non-existent. There's hard-coded default passwords that are well known and well published. It's a very inexpensive device from a Chinese manufacturer that's been on the market. But the problem I see with this sort of thought process is we could just as easily take that criteria of, well, it could be used to attack other devices, therefore they've lost the right to be on the internet. Well, we could have started saying that from the first time two different organizations got on the internet together. And any computing device could potentially be used to attack another computing device. Windows has critical vulnerabilities patched every month. Are you then going to say that Windows is not allowed on the internet? And Linux and Unix? It's a really slippery slope. And the problem is that as soon as you start saying this device is hostile and we have the right to knock it off, how quickly does that morph into this speech is hostile and we have the right to knock it off?
Yeah, well, I think the fundamental premise is just wrong-headed because there's no uniform, so maybe we do that in the U.S., right? But that's let's say 20% of the devices, 80% are outside of the U.S.
That's why the UN's taken over the internet. See?
That's right.
Yeah.
So it'll be the UN's call then, I guess is what you're saying.
Right. Absolutely.
Got it. Yeah. Well, they just send letters, right? That's what I heard.
With blue helmets. It's important to have the blue helmet.
That's what I was told.
But this is a tough one. And, this actually feels like a debate we've actually had over the last 20 years of, not necessarily as a distributed denial of service attack like this, but when less technical folks started getting on the internet, there was a lot of hand-wringing over these folks don't know how to secure their servers and run their servers. So when bad guys take over their servers, they shouldn't be allowed to keep them on the internet.
Right.
And I'm not saying the situation hasn't changed appreciably when we start talking about 620 gigabits per second. That's pretty impressive. But it's still a really dangerous concept. Do we just ignore it? Of course not. Are we going to have to get better at defending our sites against these sorts of attacks? Yeah. But I really, really shy away from just building this concept of we have the right to knock things off the internet because we don't like what they're doing.
Yeah, I guess the concept for me, and I don't know what the answer is, by the way, on
yeah, I honestly don't either. This is a tough problem to solve.
There just isn't an apparent good answer. I mean, the obvious answer is, well, the people who use it should do a better job, and the people who make it should do a better job. But neither of those seem likely to happen. So,
and there's people talking around this concept of an underwriter's laboratory, which in the U.S. is, in essence, a nonprofit third party that tests electrical devices for safety, in essence. And for the most part, most of the electrical devices sold in the U.S. are underwriter laboratory approved, which gives the buying public a sense of safety with that device. So we need a cyber UL. Well, again, we're talking about so many different jurisdictions. And the internet does not respect one's country lines versus another. So even if we said, okay, every device sold in the US had to go through the cyber UL, which established basic security capabilities and, non-firmware encoded default passwords and crap like that, that doesn't stop China or Bangladesh or South Korea or Japan or Russia or whomever from having devices that don't have that problem. That doesn't, we're tiny compared to the rest of the world.
Yep.
So I don't know. I don't have a good answer either, but it's a really, really tough problem. The one takeaway I have is I think organizations really need to re-examine their DDoS mitigation techniques. I think they're vastly undersized with the current. The size of DDoSes are increasing rapidly and dramatically.
Well, I agree, and I think the other point I was going to say is that I think we also have to, as this attack points out, rethink, and maybe the conclusions aren't that different, right? But rethink the layout of our enterprise services, and so, for instance, is it acceptable to only rely on one DNS provider? and should you run your own, or should you use two, or what? There's, and the same thing with cloud services, and I think this kind of opens up the aperture, maybe to things that we really hadn't thought of before. So what if, let's say you host your stuff on Amazon, AWS. What if the attack is against Amazon's, somehow, some way? I don't entirely know how it would happen as I sit here, but against their underlying infrastructure. And so that has an opportunity to hurt you, but you're just a bystander, right? You weren't the focus of the attack. But you're caught up in the the backsplash.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting challenge, especially as we shift towards the cloud. I think this is going to happen more and more prevalently. We've only got 3 really big cloud providers in the U.S. Yeah. So I think I would really like to see some hardcore deconstruction of this attack and what the failure was for Dine's infrastructure. What was the bottleneck? What gave in? And see if there's some design takeaways that we can learn from to be more resilient against this type of attack otherwise.
Yeah, and I do think you mentioned we have to collectively rethink our DDoS mitigation strategy with with our providers, because the attack sizes are getting to be so much larger. The problem is we're artificially constrained by the capacity of our upstream providers, and I'm not even sure that most of our upstream providers can handle a 620 gigabit attack. Even so yes, we can go to our provider and say we need a bigger DDoS mitigation service, but I think there's a practical limitation of how much they can give.
Right. It's a tough problem. DDoS is a really tough problem to solve, and I think a lot of marketing glosses over this. And the problem is, how do you know it works until it happens,
right?
And it doesn't work. It's a really, really tough problem to solve. And I think very few organizations actually test the service with a true DDoS attack against themselves.
Yeah, and this is certainly on the larger side. It's certainly difficult to test in the higher higher bandwidths. I do think that in general, I don't have any data to back this up, but I strongly suspect that DDoSes follow kind of a power law distribution where you have a whole bunch of really small ones, and then you have less that are medium, and then you have a few of these really, really large ones. But I think what we're seeing is that scale is kind of sliding up, where the size of the ones at the floor are going up, and the size of the ones at the top are going up. Everything's kind of moving up, and a lot of this is because there's more and more devices that are being found that can participate, and then also the amount of bandwidth that each of these devices are connected to is continuing to increase. And so those are I think the two factors that are happening independent, and the whole system isn't being kept in lockstep.
No, and I think the amount of devices being added to the internet is far exceeding our ability to learn how to secure them. I think there's far more insecure devices being added, and we are not collectively as internet, citizens getting better at this. We're getting worse.
That's why we need the Cyber County Internet Inspector. Like the building inspector. Yeah.
Right. And he also inspects passwords for strength. The county password inspector.
Absolutely. They could do the same thing. Yeah.
He's got a lot of inspecting to do.
That's right. So anyhow, I need to go and pack for the next leg of my trip. So thanks again, everybody, for listening. And Andy's playing with his new cat. So
that sounds wrong.
Yeah. It's Caesar. No, not Caesar's the other one.
That's Fiona. She's my 1-year-old tortie girl. She just came to visit.
Tortie cats are just awesome.
She's now climbing up the cat tree in my office.
So anyhow, thank you very much for listening. Thanks to everybody who has donated to our Patreon campaign. If you want to find links to the stories we talked about tonight, you can go to our website at www.defensivesecurity.org and look at the show notes, and you'll find those links. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kell on Twitter at Lurg. You can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we'll talk again. We'll probably record something while we're out at New York. And then
yeah, hopefully. We have time.
Yeah.
But I think both of our lives should calm down a little bit after this this month.
Yes, we will get back on a schedule. So thanks for your patience, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.